Hello, my name is Gary Johnson from Computational Science Solutions, and I'm here to lead a discussion of the impact of the top 500 list on the end user community. And to participate in that discussion are Donald Crawford, who is the Associate Laboratory Director for Computing at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, Satoshi Matsuoka, who is at the Tokyo Institute of Technology and director of its supercomputing center, and Michael Resch, who is from the High Performance Computing Center in Stuttgart and the University of Stuttgart. So these are the folks who are sort of on the receiving end of the top 500 list because they acquire and operate machines for their applications and users. They have to react to a very dynamic environment, as we know. And so it would be interesting, I think, to hear from them what their perspective is on how the top 500 list has influenced their centers up to this point, and then going forward into the future, if they would expect more of the same or any changes in the way centers, end users, and the list interact. Donna, you want to start?
Sure. So we've heard many times at this conference that LINPACK is dead. I think I would say it's gasping. I don't want to call it dead yet, because I think it actually has a very important role to play, and I'll actually get to that. Of course, what we mean by that is that it's not a good measure of how your real workload will run. But it is the measure to get on the top 500 list. I think the top 500 list has provided, and does provide a valuable service to us. And I'll come back to that in a second as well. So we buy a machine about every 3 to 5 years. And when we buy a machine, we buy it to solve certain problems and to run our workload well. We do not buy it to get on the top 500 list. We do not buy it to do LINPACK well. But when we get that machine, we want it to show well to the world. It's important that the world understands what computers we have and that we're applying the best computers that the world knows to the problems of national security, which is what our lab is all about. And so we take it very seriously when we get the computer, and we do run our own benchmarks, but then we work really hard, actually, to get the LINPACK number. So, for instance, Sequoia, thank you all very much for the top 500, #1 spot, Sequoia. The final run took 23 hours and 13 minutes. That's a lot of machine time, and it costs a lot of money to do that. But, and we ran an N=12 million blah, 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 blah matrix on that. And that was not the first time we ran the problem. And so to me, when I say LINPACK is gasping, what I mean is that it is a measure of keeping the machine up, of having everything, all cylinders firing all at the same time, so to speak. So this is, the latest, greatest technology, because when you buy a machine, you buy the best thing you can at the time. So it's the latest, greatest technology. It's new. It's at a scale. I mean, we have 1.5 million cores, and yet we want to make this thing run. So it took a large team of people from IBM and Livermore several tries to make this work. And so it was a great partnership to make it work. So to me, that provided a very valuable service. And I know that in the end, we can't continue forever and ever. It becomes cost prohibitive, because every day that I'm running LINPACK, I'm not running a real workload on the machine. And yet, it does help me burn it in, and it is a simple metric that the world understands that we can use to compare and show how we sit with everyone else. So I'll stop there. There's much more that I could say, but I need to let my colleagues have the floor.
Okay, so I built many machines over my career. So first, I'll say from a grudge work aspect. I built many machines over my career, small ones, big ones, like Tsubame. And over the past, I've been on Now, my machines have been on the top 500 for the last 12 years. So there have been 24 top 500s, of which we made 12 submissions. So my first reaction is you never know what top 500 is unless you run it yourself. It's such a demanding workload for the machine. And as Donner said, it's great for burning the system. And it's great for, it does correlate somewhat with certain types of workloads. So a lot of people dismiss the top 500 saying it's inconsequential to my workload. But actually for dense matrix problems, it is important. It is an important metric. Now, so then wear my academic hat. So what is top 500? I mean, what as in form of very theoretical sense, what does it represent? Well, it represents a certain type of workload. The problem is we've never been too scientific about it. The only person I think who have really been trying to correlate these very strongly is probably Eric Strohmeyer, and he does that for very good reason. There have been attempts where you try to do some soft correlation with how this performance, top 500 performance, correlates with the best of the Gordon Bell Award, which there are criticisms of that, but still, people regard as much more application-centric type of kind of competition. So there really needs to be more scientific investigation. And so with the lack of that, except for the political, economical, all these issues, when I look at it from a pure research perspective, when I'm running my machines, they're folklores. We don't really understand it. And we're saying all these statements without really understanding it.
Michael, how do things look from your perspective?
No, it's extremely difficult to follow up because Satoshi said we say things without understanding, so it's hard for me to say anything. But the question was, what impact does the list have on the center and the users? And there are a number of items on the list that you have to go through when you go for a new system and set it up and make it available to the users. One of the items on the list is to run the LINPACK benchmark. And then the second item where the list is important is when you have the inaugurational ceremony and the Prime Minister comes and since he doesn't know anything about HPC, the typical question is, what is our rank on the top 500 list? Because this is what his advisors tell him. And so the second thing that I have to do with respect to the top 500 list is explain to him that the list is highly irrelevant. And so far, all prime ministers were able to understand this. And that's okay. But an impact on what we're doing or how we are procuring or how we are operating the system or anything like that is not there. The top 500 list is an interesting collection of data. And you can look at it from two sides. One is investigate the data. The other is something which I do in a project with sociologists, philosophers, and political scientists, and that is looking at the history and the meaning of that list and what does it say about the community and what is the view of the, say, humanities on what we are doing here. It helps to do this because it gives sort of a picture of what this society is about, what this community is about. What are we thinking about? We're thinking in terms of a list that says, okay, there is the #1 system, it's the biggest and the greatest. Everyone else is pretty much irrelevant. We're looking at a single number, and we're very proud of that. That's a sort of a sociological information that we get from the list, and it's fairly interesting for the humanities because they look at it from a completely different side.
Okay, so we have a variety of views about the list. Why don't we go backwards and address the question, if you think the list needs modification, improvement, evolution, what are your suggestions for it?
No, I wouldn't say the list needs modifications. It serves a certain purpose. It gives you the information of where is the largest system that runs LINPACK the fastest way you can do it. That's fine, it's very useful. And I really would say we shouldn't change it. I mean, there are suggestions that you do dollars per flop or watt per flop or whatsoever. But the list has a certain flaw, and Hans in his interview clearly understands what the strengths and the weaknesses are. If we take this number and compare it to other numbers, the only thing we do is we take a slightly flawed number and flaw it even more. So I would not modify the list. And also the attempts to come up with more benchmarks or different benchmarks, they don't give you more information. They don't really give you more information. A supercomputing system is a supercomputing system, which is something that is very, very complex. And the only answer you are interested in, you're actually interested in, is you run a simulation and can you solve the problem? And no list will ever give you that answer, because you're solving different problems. If I buy a system today, I'll solve this type of problem with a certain size, with a certain model. If you give me a system that is a factor of 10 more powerful, I will not use the same model. I will not use the same size of problem. So the LINPACK is a good number. It is flawed, but it's a reasonable number.
Satoshi?
Well, like I said, we need science of top 500, or the rankings. And so looking at from the perspective of does it represent our workloads well, is something that needs to be answered. Well, currently, the analysis, menu analysis that's actually starting to be done, seem to point that for dense applications, there's a fairly strong correlation. At least it gives you enough to have a good expectation as to how your application would perform. For certain other types of applications, like bandwidth-constrained applications, finite element analysis, spectral method, and so forth, it's not a good indicator. And so, what's the minimal set of benchmarks that are required to represent these expectations? One candidate could be a Graph 500, because everybody thinks, again, Graph 500, there's so much folklore about Graph 500. Graph 500 is a memory and interconnect bandwidth benchmark, and from a large, it's not a big data per se in the way they do things like data mining type of benchmark. And it could be a very one representative figure where we could look at the other aspect of the system. Now, having said that, so if those are two representative numbers, then ultimately, what would my cost be? Okay, what's the metric by which I buy these systems, or what is the metric by which we can scale our system? Well, one thing is cost, but that's very highly variant. But the other is obviously power. We know about, as we go forward in 20 years, power will be the most constraining factor in all these systems. So ultimately, what will matter, what will govern your applications for dense type of applications is what's the flops per watt value. It's not flops per byte or any other metric, flops per watt. And if it's LINPACK, it could be LINPACK. It could be peak, or it could be LINPACK or something else, but it's flops per watt. If it's sparse application, then it's how much bandwidth you have in the system, just like Seymour Cray said. So it's bytes per second per watt that will ultimately matter. So there are maybe two representative benchmarks, dense, LINPACK, one graph, and then you have the green versions of both, the green 500, green graph 500. Maybe that can picture the systems nicely, but then we have to go the academics research with all the correlative analysis to verify.
Okay. Donna? Comments?
So as I said earlier, when we get to exascale, we can't run LINPACK for weeks. That's cost prohibitive. I like what I'm hearing from Satoshi, and I know that the organizers are thinking about convening the academics and the community to discuss the very things that Satoshi has been talking about. And I think we all want to participate in that discussion. But beyond the actual benchmarks, the top 500 list gives us a lot of other information. What is the system architecture? Where is the system located? What's the interconnect? What's the memory? What is the power? And so there is a lot of information that it has been collecting for 20 years, and it gives us this wonderful trend of what's happening at the high end, admittedly, in this community. And early on, there was not a whole lot of interest outside of our community in the top 500 list. But now it's well beyond. And as Michael says, the politicians want to come and they set their budgets accordingly because it
Makes newspaper headlines.
It does make newspaper headlines. HPC has become globalized. It's because everybody understands the value of the tool that can be applied to your economic competitiveness, your national defense, your science discovery. And as such, it's a matter of national pride to place well on this list. And so I think that will continue. And I think we look forward with anticipation to the next list every time for those reasons. And I hope it will continue for 20 years. And I want to thank the organizers, Jack and Hans and Horst and Eric. It's a nice thing that it has brought our community together.
If we have another little bit of time, let me just put out one more question to you for a very short answer, each of you. And that is, given that this list is so visible, and given that each of your centers has a user community, an applications and user community, what impact does it have on them? Does it attract a certain character of users if you're high on the list? Are they more apt to adapt their codes? Do they care at all? What's your impression?
Short answer is my actual users who are running long jobs on the machine, they don't care.
Certainly there is pride involved. And users take pride in running their code on a machine that behaves well. So to the extent that aside from size issues I just mentioned, that they take confidence in us that we are able to compete well with big centers like yours. And gives them confidence that they are getting the best of the breed.
Okay. Michael, you have the last word.
I'm not aware of any user who would be interested in our top 500 ranking. I've never heard a user talk to me about this.
So interested perhaps in the ranking, but it doesn't affect what they do on the machine. That's what I meant by they don't care.
But they take pride.
A user never spoke to me about our top 500 ranking. Okay. Never.
Because they know.
Interesting.
Maybe they are Germans.
So only the government speaks to you about it?
And even they ask this question only. What is about this list? Where are we? And so the users are not interested. The users actually, they're interested in, can I solve my problem? Is the system stable? Is it fast? Can I compile?
Well, see, but the users have choices. But users have choices. And when users have a choice, where do they pick? Mm-hmm. That's the big issue.
Anybody have any other comments before we close? No?
There was always this question about will we see the list in 20 years from now?
Yeah.
And the answer is, Hans, are you still here?
Yeah, that's what I asked when they asked it earlier.
I hope that Hans will be around in 20 years.
Jack, you're going to be still here in 20 years?
Yeah, and I hope that the guys in 20 years will still compile the list and feel happy about it.
Well, I suggest that we applaud
the organizers.
The organizers, right. And force them to continue for the next 20 years.
Very well.
Applaud them anyway.
Applaud them, yeah.
Let me thank the
for Jack.